Governance, public service.
One,
Public service.
ICTs and public service. First of all, he has to know what he's talking about. When you talk about governance, what do you mean? There is a distinction between government and there's a distinction between the new word governance. What do we mean by governance? So what it will be involved when he's looking at this? Let me hear comments. What will be involved?
Excuse me.
Governance?
Excuse me.
No, not yourself. The new people? What does it mean? He's looking at the word governance.
All individuals participated.
No, man. You have, there's a whole literature on governance and the indices of governance. There's a whole wealth of literature. Governance came in the 1990s as a vogue in the 1990s. And therefore, when you're talking about governance, it's different from government, which is administration. What is ICTs? What does ICT comprise of? ICT is one word? Different dimensions. What are the different dimensions of ICTs?
Information and communication technology.
Information and
Communication.
communication. Two words. And again, here now he's talking about the public service, not the public sector. Public service, narrow. What do you think is happening with him here now? Because he has all these words here that he has to control. What is the first thing he must do? Governance, as I say, has a number of indices. One of the indices is probably people, the civil society. How you engage your civil society, how you engage in the civil society through information or communication. He has to take one, either information, and information is quite broad. What kind of information? What are the various facets of this information? So each time he takes a word, he has to break that word down to its simplest form and different dimensions of what that word means. In the public sector, he can't do all the ministries, all the departments. He has to narrow down. You're constantly, in other words, what you constantly have to do is narrow, 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 and narrow. See all the terms he used? All of them broke. Keep narrowing, constantly narrowing. Now another thing is going to happen. He just wants to do this. But then I'll ask you one thing. After you even narrow, what is going to be your background literature? You must base your thesis or your topic on a background literature, an existing literature in the field. Either you rebut that literature or you add to the literature. What is he going to base it on? What will be your background literature? What will be your literature review? What will you be saying? What will you be looking at? And that's what I'll ask you. What is existing for you to have a foundation literature for your thesis? So what will be your research topic? Let me hear now. You say governance of ICTs in the public service. That's your theme. What is your research question?
Should I read it out?
Yes.
Working title. Do institutions really matter in the implementation of public policy? Colon. An evaluation of central ICT institutions in Trinidad and Tobago and comparative country or countries that haven't concluded that yet.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tell me what to think. Let's go on this side. He's talking plural, institutions. He's talking broad implementation, and he's talking public policy. But when he comes here now, he's narrowing it down to central ICT institutions, which means you have a number of them. Which ones you're looking at? Now, if you want to do a comparator, it means to say whatever he selects here has to be present where? In the country that he's going to investigate. And you're asking a broad questions, do institutions matter? Now, that is the name of a book. What is your specific research question? What is specific to you? What is your question? What do you think is wrong that you want to look at it? And that's a question I want to ask you. What is wrong? You understand where I'm coming from? What is wrong that you want to investigate it? Or you want to raise it as an issue?
Well, should I go back to what motivated me to choose this?
No. What is wrong? Tell us now what is wrong. Remember, I tell you life is not...
The thing that I'm trying to address.
What do you want to address?
The shortfall, the shortcomings in implementation of ICT in Trinidad and Tobago Public Service.
Now hear what he's telling us, eh?
Sorry?
I'm just asking why broad institutions if it's the public service?
Well, the plural for institutions there is, the S is there because my intention at this point, it's work in progress of course, is to look at the central agency in Trinidad and compare with one or more central agencies in one or more other countries, so I can learn lessons from them.
Are you
also, sorry, go on.
Okay. I'm just saying that still appears to be very broad. It's those same central agencies and central agencies in other countries.
I think she's meaning that the institutions doesn't specify public service alone, it includes other institutions as well. Based on what is there, ICT institutions in TNT and not just the public service ICT, like eGov and these.
I'm seeing it as the focus is looking at the central agency. There are many countries that have chosen to facilitate the implementation of ICT in their public service by the use of a central agency. So I'm looking at the central agency in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, let's look at it like this. You have one central agency. What is a central agency? There's one central agency. You could talk about structure. You could talk about policy. You could talk about procedures. You could talk about leadership styles. You could talk about budgeting. So you could talk, an agency is not an entity. It's not like saying, this is only a table. You have to break it down to its finest. What do you think is the problem with the central agency? Remember this one doing the mating habits of a red ants. Just how with sex, you know. Just sex in a red ant. Nothing else. Not how with getting food, how with building nests. Just sex in a red ant. The same way I said to you. It's an agency, it's an institution. But what part of that agency you think going to have the most stumbling blocks in implementing this thing called ICT? And what part of the ICT you're looking at? Information or communication? Yeah.
In your view, do institutions really matter? As far as this, from your point of view, do institutions matter?
Without any empirical study,
yeah,
I believe they do, because the things that they are required to implement are large and complex, and you need to approach it in a structured way. And institutions allow you to facilitate structured.
Right, so they matter for those very reasons, right? In the context of Trinidad, do you see shortcomings as far as that is concerned in the implementation?
Yeah.
Right.
So we have one right.
So those are the questions. That would drive your question, right? In terms of when you identify what these are, right? Of course, you want to find out what why. So you build your question around that why question, right? And that gives you that helps you to narrow down and get the focus you want to get.
So you say let's go back, Dr. Taylor. What you say? Let's go back. What we should go back to is what are the shortcomings?
Yeah.
And then from the shortcomings, we could trace it back to something here, which is another way of looking at it. So you understand? So then what you should do is now identify shortcomings. A, B, C, and D. Keep narrowing. And then with these shortcomings, you could trace it back to something involved here, whether that is structure, whether that is how people sit, what are the regulations governing them, and you could select one thing here, one shortcoming here, and say this is responsible for this, and this is what I want to test. So you have what they call a dependent variable, and then have what they call an independent variable, or a number of independent variables. If you have a number of independent variables there, you have to keep some constant. You have to say, I do this one, but I could keep this constant so. And then you'll have intervening variables coming in there. And again, how you control them.
I would just like to add something else. Governance is one of those very ambiguous, complicated concepts or terms. Similar to development. Many people like to define it as a right? It's extremely important that you define governance. And I think in this case, because you're using the term institutions and governance in this case may in fact be the quality of the regulatory framework rather than governance in terms of participation or governance in terms of, so you will have to define, and I think that's
defining the term.
Yeah, you have to define governance, because if you don't from the get-go, you would find that you are going all over the place and your literature itself would be, all over the place, and you would not be able to define those same variables that Prof is talking about, because you have different interpretations of it. So I think you have to first structure what is governance. This research is defining governance as X, and as a result, you're going to look at how governance, because this can be interpreted in many ways. For example, voice and accountability, one of the indicators by the World Bank, by Kaufman and others, actually speaks about governance as voice and accountability, which is people. But then, another indicator speaks about the rule of law, which is the quality of the rule of law, or governance in terms of institutional effectiveness.
But either which one he selects, there must be a literature.
Yeah, there will be a whole slew of literature
to support what you want to do.
I think what he's asking is whether or not, as far as governance is concerned, what you identify is structure, policy, procedures, leadership, budgeting. Those are the elements.
Those are some, eh? We could go through more.
He can be selected and give his justification for the selection that you make. Alright. And then if you look at do institutions really matter, and you say, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, they matter. They seem not to matter. Why do they not matter? You say, well, okay, there are shortcomings in terms of the structure, the policy, the procedures, all of which relate to
governance. Or, as Josh is pointing out, perhaps it's wrong regulation, inadequate regulation,
right.
And those things could impact also on how this thing is still done.
Another thing too, in terms of the focus, the central governance of ICTs, keeping it clean, do you really want to go the governance route? Because you already identified, look at the central agencies, and look at how many different variables that Professor identified here.
And there's just some.
Do you really want governance is a whole big, like Josh was saying?
So do you want to use the term governance, or do you want to use something that is more specific?
Completely and focus on more good.
Or do you want to say that the government doesn't give enough money for development of ICTs? Or is it that government doesn't have regulation in place to allow for ICTs?
Governance is how things are
related. So you have a number of dimensions of what you want to do. Each one, anyone you select, must have the literature to support it. Okay? Does it make it a little bit clearer?
So perhaps something that may be useful as a working title would be the implementation of ICTs in public service. Do institutions matter?
In that case.
So a title like that now would give the reader that one, you're focusing primarily on the implementation phase of the policy cycle. You're looking at how institutions are structured, and you're questioning whether they're the appropriate types or structures of institutions to facilitate this kind of implementation of ICTs, or whether another structure is needed, and you're applying some kind of perspective.
Although, you know, I would have liked now coming out of it, and he looks at the regulatory framework.
To what extent does the regulatory framework
Allow for the development of the future development of ICT in a third world country?
Yeah.
And I would advise that perhaps you there's a PhD, right? So perhaps instead of saying ICTs, because if you read on the literature on ICTs, and I guess Dr. Theodore, you are familiar with ICTs and some of the literature, I guess, somewhat, right? You would know that it's quite broad.
Yeah.
So if maybe you know, if you're speaking about ICTs, there are so many things you can speak about. You can speak about the HR systems. You can speak about different reforms that took place. And so perhaps you may want to look at one particular strategy. You can look at, let's say, TT Connect or one of those things. So you're specific, the implementation, and therefore you look, because depending on the type of ICT you're speaking of in the public service, there will be different governance structures. Now, the moment you start to speak about ICTs and pluralize it, because of the multiple structures, you create more complexity, and it's then difficult to analyze because you cannot really create a model to assess the success, failure, or any such thing of that, because there's so many different variables in there. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with Marlene as well, and what you're saying as well, that it doesn't seem like governance really is the
focus.
Yeah, and then then you have variables. It might seem that the dependent variable is really the independent. If it is that, yeah, so it's not.
It's too many.
I mean, back up still broad, not really.
Okay.
Governance is a sexy title, but you know,
You need to really bring it down. You need to pull that through. You need to think through each word you say.
But then this way the review of the literature becomes important, because you can see all kinds of content in the classes, in terms of what content is what, and you have to.
Let's see Mira. Let's see Mira's topic. Let's see Mira's topic. Mira's doing a topic. So come and say your topic.
The agent policy in Trinidad.
Can I take a picture of it for you to read?
Oh, sorry.
new way of taking notes, you know. Spend all the time, yeah.
It's another glare.
Sure, you take it on profit, Jerry.
You should take off the flash. Yeah, Stephen, you should take off the flash. Because it's going to create there's a cooler outside.
Okay, that's still see we have cake here. We have a man in here.
Well, next time they'll decide when they want to bring and assign each other.
No, next time you assign 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the people who did, it's very simple. The people who did bring it this time,
Sure.
will bring next time.
So what glare I got from this side, you won't get it.
Well, that's a process. You said she's done all this.
Please.
I'm
not sure.
Okay, so let's coming in and let's try Mira. Mira, research question was what? Mira, what was your research question?
Can you the blind?
She was looking at the agent policy in Trinidad and Tobago.
No. So, this?
Okay, now what you said?
Yeah, I'm not sure it will be
What was your
visible.
research question? What was your first research?
Let's hope it is.
So that essentially was the crux of first thing and strengths and weaknesses of the policy of aging in Trinidad with respect to aging. Now, that was what she wants to do. But she wants to look at is their policy, and she wants to evaluate this policy. That's all she set out to do. She had the background literature. She knew how much people we had. She's looking at the policy, and because she's working in the division, she's evaluating what are the challenges they experience.
And the most recent literature was Dr. Rose. She did her PhD on the Asian coast.
Yeah.
So she's the most recent, and she's my director.
And she's a beautiful woman. I want to say
And
that.
we can have a library of information.
So this is an easy thesis for you. How are you going with it?
It's good. I'm on the literature review.
Okay, good. So she's all right, and she's just going ahead with it. Let's hear some other topics. No, you people should be writing down your topics, eh?
When was the Asian policy implemented?
2006.
Based on the strengths and weaknesses, we can make
Yes.
recommendations.
But remember, this is not government. You could come with a conclusion. I don't like recommendations.
Or you can look at her recommendations.
Yeah.
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 That's what
And you could,
That's exactly what I came
yeah.
And build on that.
And build on that. Okay?
Find a PhD, look at your recommendations. No.
But she was specifically at support.
You build it.
Because major stakeholders, like political parties, and how that affected the Asian policy.
Okay, you can select anyway. I think you can. Okay. Unless somebody wants to go on with this.
Some clarification is needed over here by Mulder.
Okay, send that to don't take recommendation. That is that whatever.
That's all levels. I don't take recommendations. You're not government. You're an academic, and you must remember you're an academic thing. We're not paying you to do any policy for government. So you don't make recommendations for us. You do conclusion or summary. Okay?
No recommendation for future research.
You can make a recommendation for future research, but you don't make recommendation. You're not a government agency. All right? Be cautious. Remember, even when you're writing, it's an academic discussion, not a government paper. The plagiarism is something that we are looking at, and you know that even at the master's level, we're going to check you for the plagiarism. So be cautious. Good. Anybody wants to come up and present their topic so far?
I just wanted to say, I don't have the question, but my topic of interest is border security.
So I will sit back and let's go through it with her.
I know you want me about this.
No, that's fine. You could take it. No, that's fine.
We have to go on the board, Professor, we can.
No, don't be lazy. Don't start. Okay, so she's looking border security.
So that's what.
As a concept, it's
That's what I said
something
earlier.
that's no longer,
Correct.
yeah.
That's what I said, oh dear.
So,
So you read that.
No, I mean,
no, leave it, I guess, because we can.
do
So I
you?
get all the feedback.
Yeah, do you?
Yeah. Now, one thing that is good, she is clear. We're looking at only border security.
Yeah.
We're looking at after 9/11. So there's a period. And Dr. Theodori, this is your baby. Go with it. What do you see as important there for her as research?
Is it productive?
I will ask which one of the two, what's she looking at? Which country is she looking at?
I wanted to do Trinidad, but I'm not getting information on border security because it's now a topic of
Secure topic.
Okay, so what else you want to look at?
Well,
What
I
other
would
country you
prefer
want
to
to
just
look
look at Trinidad, but the Caribbean region generally.
Then
you
specify
have-
Caribbean.
I will ask you, do you have data? And what aspect of border security you want to look at?
All points of entry, whether it's in ports, the airports,
Any port?
seaports, the
So any
airports,
port?
yeah, all ports of entry.
Have you checked CARICOM impacts?
Where?
CARICOM impacts.
I'm not sure.
That's
they will have
security.
implications.
Yeah.
Where is that?
They are on, I keep passing it every day, just now, I can tell you the address. Keep talking, I pass it every day, just now.
But all ports of entry, security, because since after 9/11, they were heightened security.
What knew you were to add?
Well, in Trinidad we have open ports. We don't have much border control, border security in Trinidad and in wider Caribbean.
So what new you want to add?
What they are doing to enforce the security at the borders.
Some base benchmarks, so therefore there's no research which was started.
In terms of what you're saying, Dr. Theodore, in terms of looking at border security, there's a difference between SIDS, smaller and developing states, in terms of security and archipelagos versus landlocked states, no? There are different issues or challenges that they may face.
It depends what do you address, but my first question would be why post 9/11? What changed in Trinidad on 9/11?
When you go to the airport security, for example, you have to do a lot of things you never did before 9/11.
I know. Why?
Because of what happened at 9/11.
What happened in Trinidad on 9/11? That is my question.
Nothing, but what happened impacted you.
No, I mean, there is a very important component in terms of perception, image, and spillover. Everything that happened in Trinidad since 9/11 is due to what happened in the United States in 9/11. There is no chance of having here something like the Twin Towers or things like that. And yet, what you see here is a mirroring of what you see there. And that, I think, would be interesting to address at least in a marginal note or something. Because it stays, it is at the very fundament of your title, post 9/11, and objectively you have nothing on 9/11 on Trinidad to take into account.
If I might add, the reason they have to be compliant with international standards. So for certain airlines to fly in and out of Trinidad and Tobago, you have to be compliant with the standards of the FAA and all these other organizations have implemented. So that's where it starts. You have to look at the why did we have to implement them, and that's why we have to be compliant. CARICOM Impacts has a website, and they are on Keith Street. I know I passed it every day, brand new, right? The numbers are online, you can Google them, but they would have the information you're looking for in terms of the border security, what measures are supposed to be implemented. As CARICOM, the directors that came from the council, and because they're different, of course, CARICOM has different councils, you know, COSA, COFAB, all of these things. And this CARICOM Impacts is out of the security arm, and the requirements for each of the Caribbean countries comes out, well, supposed to be followed from them. And of course, each country would have its own particular mechanisms that it implements. But there is work going on. It's just that I don't know if national security has that information themselves in one place. You can get it, but you'll be doing the base research. Because I suspect there's no other academic research.
You know, I was wondering if you know what I was wondering, if you're actually assessing border security
what is actually
in certain countries.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, if you find it lacking, then I will ask the question, why? Which takes me to a different dimension.
Yeah. Why not?
It's more than border security for me in a certain country. I mean, there are regulations in place that we must comply with. But if you assess it and you find it lacking, then there's another dimension. Why? Is it political will?
Funding.
Is it funding? Why? And to me, that is the gray area you have to do.
You see, my challenge in this is that there are contesting perspectives to assess border security.
Yeah.
The role, purpose, and mandate of impacts, RSS, SSA.
It doesn't go there.
It's primary, not SIA, SSA,
I know,
which
but
is
that's
a
what you go there.
legal entity.
It's too much.
In fact, is primarily for drug control and narcotic trade. That's the purpose of it. And Dr. Theodore, you had a very important point raising 9/11, because in fact, 9/11 is not about drugs.
Terrorism.
It's about terrorism. I mean, while some may make the link between the drug trade and terrorism and all that grammar, that's not what you're doing here. So if you're speaking about border security, is it related in this case to terrorism? Or is it related to drug trade?
And that's why our response is what is peculiar to us.
Or is it a policy transfer? That a policy must be transferred given that we have to adhere to international
Yeah, that's what it
we
is.
have to define why 9/11.
So